It's time for another Sweets and Talks Discuss. Today we're going to discuss dyslexia. And the reason we're going to discuss it is because we are both dyslexic. Apparently there is a huge misunderstanding in what dyslexia is and what it's like to live with. So can you go over the definitions we found?
Well, I just did a quick search on DuckDuckGo, and the Mayo Clinic says, dyslexia is a learning disorder that involves difficulty reading due to problems identifying speech sounds and learning how they relate to letters and words, decoding. Also called reading disability, dyslexia affects areas of the brain that process language. People with dyslexia have normal intelligence and usually have normal vision. Pretty simplistic. I don't think it really describes it very well. I also found in Wikipedia, let's see, the website is en.wikipedia.org/wiki/dyslexia. Dyslexia, also known as reading disorder, is characterized by trouble with reading despite normal intelligence. Different people are affected to different degrees. Problems may include difficulties in spelling words, reading quickly, writing words, sounding out words in the head, pronouncing words, and reading aloud and understanding what one reads. Those were just the two that I found that popped out at me.
And notice not only were we able to read off the web address, but all the content.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And I have dyslexia.
Oh, I'm trying to think how I can. It's difficult to explain how my mind works.
Another thing that's interesting here is it does not mention numbers. But it stands to reason if you reverse letters, you probably reverse numbers. Nobody here mentions that. I find that very interesting. Now, I didn't go into the website. I didn't click on it. I just an overview of what the website is.
Yeah, it's just a summary therein. But what's funny is people are like, so what's it like to be dyslexic? It's hard for me to describe how my mind works because that's all I know from my side. I couldn't, it's sort of like, so how do you see the color red?
Okay, try this. So how do you approach a mathematical problem?
Well, I just start solving it. I've had a couple times where I had the answer, I didn't even know why or how. Well, what's funny is when I was a kid, in grade school and stuff, they identified as dyslexic, and they always tell me, fight it, fight it, fight it, fight it, fight it. And it occurred to me one day, why am I fighting what my mind does naturally? Now, by fight it, I have a tendency of reversing numbers. I need to write 27, so I write 72. Well, what I started doing is reverse everything twice. I read it, reverse it into my mind, I go to write it, I reverse it again, writing it. So 27, 72, 27.
Yes. And we've often commented amongst ourselves that dyslexics have a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And yours is being able to do math in your head.
In fact, most math teachers I had, they want me to write it out. Of course, you want to make sure the person understands how they're doing the math equation. You just don't want them to be able to write it down because if they misunderstand some part later on, they're going to run into some problems. Maybe a bridge will collapse or something. Wing falls off the aircraft, something kind of important might happen. So you want to make sure people understand how they're doing the math they're doing. Makes sense. I can do pretty complex math in my head and write down the answer. And a couple math teachers I had would just get so frustrated because they'd be looking at what were literally chicken scratches as I'm making notes as I resolve the problem. Writing down a key number here and there, but not writing down the equation or steps. They don't even know what step this number went to. What was 7? There's no 17 anywhere in this equation. Why'd you write down 17? Well, I might have written down part of a number I needed, or something like that. Or as I'm resolving, going down things, and come up with the correct answer. So I had several get really mad and frustrated with me because I'd have the correct answer. I could explain how to resolve the problem, but I couldn't write down how I got there. I had one math teacher that understood that and was actually, he was the same way. I don't know if he was necessarily dyslexic, but he said when I write down, I tend to run into problems. But if I do it in my head, I'm fine. So as long as you can show me that you know how to solve the problem and that you can do the problem, he'll take a number sign with the number of the question, write down the number, circle it for your answer. So I did really well in his class. So when I started reversing everything twice.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, I don't do numbers. That's why algebra was such a hard subject for me, because they substituted letters and numbers. For my mind, for my brain, when I was in school, there was no difference between a letter and a number. I would find myself trying to add two A's, or an A and a 2, or a B and a C, or read a 3 and a 4. My brain was just really scrambling the information when I was younger, before, as I started to develop my coping skills. My issue was reading, and that's, well, math is my issue. I can't get over that. I mess up the checkbook every single month, don't I, dear? But words, reading, writing, that's where I excelled in my compensation. I got to where I would not read every single word in a paragraph or on a page, but I was able to skim through the page and pick out certain words that were important to tell me what this paragraph is about, what this page is about, what the story is. Math, okay, in math, the word problems, I excelled in those. I could do word problems all day long because it was words. But I don't read words the way I would think most people do. I think most people learn, when they're learning how to read, C-A-T, K-A-T, cat. I see a 3-letter word that is a certain shape, and it says cat. I see an odd shape word, and it's orange. There's a little dangly thing about halfway through the word, there's a little dangly thing, that's an orange. Grandma. It's very difficult for me to explain, but I see a shape and I know what the word is. I don't necessarily read the word. When I'm writing, if I'm writing cursive, I do pretty good. I don't reverse my letters. If I'm writing print, I have a hard time with the B and the D and the P and the G and a few others that I will mix up.
In school, I had a very hard time keeping my B and D's facing the right way.
Yeah. And it didn't help that I was also ambidextrous when I was learning how to write. Mother finally told me just to pick a hand and use it, so I started using my right hand. And lately, I've noticed that the ambidextrous stuff is coming back. I catch myself every once in a while, which is great because I could use that at work.
That's actually interesting because I'm also ambidextrous, and when I was young, I would halfway write a word, and then my hand would just get tired, so I'd switch to the other hand. And so you'd have different handwritings changing in the middle of a word, going back and forth.
Yeah, I used to do the same thing. Or, because if you're writing with your left hand, you kind of you're writing over top of, your hand is over top what you're trying to write. And sometimes I want to see what I wrote, so I have to switch hand. And then I'll go back. Now, when I'm typing, I tend to reverse, I would say, my strokes, my finger strokes. Every time I'm writing from, it comes out form. Anytime I'm writing form, it comes out from. My to is ought. Oftentimes, I'll just reverse the letters with my typing.
You mean print? No, when you're typing.
Typing, yes.
Oh, when you're typing on a computer?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I will have a lot of misspells, and I'm not sure how much of that is errors in my typing or actually tied to dyslexia. All I can say is thank God for spell check.
Yes. Except it doesn't catch my typos most of the time because their words are just the wrong word. I don't know.
When I'm learning something new, like training for a job or something, the dyslexic mind learns slower taking in data. And the best way I could describe this or come up with an explanation as to why is it's like you're overwhelmed by the detail of what you're trying to understand. Once you get used to the detail, while it might take you longer to get through all this stuff and be slower getting it down, once you have it down, you have a much deeper understanding. It's almost like a per se normal person learns all the big points and then fills in the detail, whereas a dyslexic is overwhelmed by the detail initially, but then they understand how those details link together to form the big portions. There was one job I had where, and being in technical fields, I never shied away from hard problems, whereas other people would try to shy away from hard problems, pan it off to somebody else and things because they didn't want to deal with it. I didn't shy away from it because I knew it would make me a good tech. There was one job I was there about 2 years at this point, and this guy comes up to me and asks me how to do stuff, and he'd been there 7 years. I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking to myself, dude, I should be asking you how to do this stuff. And I explained to him what the commands were to get what he wanted. And I thought it was so funny. But if you spend all your time avoiding the hard problems, when those problems come up, it's like, shoot, how do you resolve that? Oh, go to the guy who knows all this stuff. It's funny, but when I'm learning something new or a complex thing, if I need to type in, say, 432, it's like I pause, analyze, then type in 432. There's one job I had that my supervisor actually asked me, okay, you take a call from a customer, you put them on hold, and it's like you stare at the screen for a moment, and then you start to react. And what's going on there is in my mind, I'm just organizing what the customer's problem is, what do I need to resolve it, and then pull up the appropriate stuff for that. So I'm basically analyzing. And I couldn't tell you how long that might be. It might be 3 seconds, but there's a pause. Same thing if I'm typing in stuff on it's like analyze, stop, okay, now move. And there seems to be that catch in my mind going from one step to another in those complex things until I'm more familiar with them or get them down. I had one supervisor in a job in training that picked up on that, and actually she asked me if I was dyslexic. I said, well, actually I am. And she was amazed. You compensate really well. How do you also she was amazed at how well I was able to do all this stuff being dyslexic. And I was like, it's not that big a deal. You just give us time. Another job I was in, I met somebody, and he was actually very minor dyslexic. He did not realize he was dyslexic, but he had all those steps, and he was explaining to me, sometimes he's begging, one job they were at, he's begging, please give me time that I can get this down, and if you'll give me time to get this, I will be your best tech. And he was. Didn't learn the stuff right away. And there's a little bit of a glory to that hot tech that learns everything right now, gets it all done, and he's just out there. But they have holes in their knowledge, and I've had to help quite a few of them out fixing all their problems. Whereas another job I was at, I was there 1 month. Once I struggled through the initial stuff, I was very rapidly the best tech there because I understood some of the basic stuff a lot of other guys didn't. They just got those highlights, got through there, and just focused on those highlights and let the details attend to themselves. I took care of the details, and everything worked out well on the big stuff. Amazing how that works. So the dyslexic mind learns slower, but it gets a much deeper, better understanding, if that makes sense. And you're able to carry on better. But yeah, it's like you have a superpower. I was reading I was in grade school, I forget how old I was, reading this story, and there was a key part of the detail, and he said he was an accomplished reader at reading upside down. And he noticed this one person at his desk every day at the same time. He had different things written in there, but it was always every day at the same time. It was every like Thursday at the same time. One time it said meeting with this person, another time it said some different things. But he noticed that, and he was being upside down. He was able to read this and realize, and that was a key trigger to figure out and solve the mystery. And I thought, wow, that'd be a cool ability to have. And I really started working at it and realized that, like, wait a minute, I was doing that anyway. I actually have had times I read something upside down and didn't realize it.
Right. I read upside down all the time, and I used to be talking with friends and stuff like that. We'd be reading something, and I'd be sitting across the table from my friend, and the book is laying there flat, and we're both supposed to be reading it, and she's like, well, we got to read this. And I'm like, I'm reading it. She goes, how can you be reading it? You're upside down. I said, I can read upside down. She said, no, you can't. I said, yes, I can. And she said, no, you can't. So I read to her upside down. And okay. I can read sideways. It doesn't matter what angle the material is. I can read it at almost any angle. But I know that in school, we used to pass notes. I think every kid passes notes at some point or another in their schooling.
Nowadays, I think they just text each other.
But that's true. Maybe it's changed now. But the teacher that we had would, if they got hold of the note, he would read it to the whole class. Well, of course, us girls were discussing in detail how the cute kid is just so cute and so adorable, and you know how kids are.
The important stuff girls discuss.
Yes. Well, we didn't want that read, so we started to use mirror writing. I was the only one that was able to read and write the notes in class without a mirror. My friends would have to wait until break and recess or whatever, and go into the girls' bathroom and hold the note up to the mirror and be able to read it or write it. But I was able to do that without a mirror. I don't know how I did it. I just know I could do it. This was before I was diagnosed as being dyslexic. And I remember one time that the teacher got hold of the note, and I don't remember which one it was, but the teacher was quite disgusted, opened it up, looked at it, turned it upside down, looked at it, turned it around sideways, looked at it, crumpled it up, threw it in the trash, and said, don't be writing notes in my class. Was not able to read the note. So, I've told my children and several other kids that you and I have dealt with over the years, have been told that they're dyslexic. And we always tell them, cool, you have a superpower. I have a friend who is dyslexic, and so bad that he simply cannot read or write. He can write his own name and his address and his phone number. He reads at either a kindergarten or first grade level, yet he is very intelligent, and he has a job where he operates very large, very complicated machinery. In his job, whenever there is a new piece of machinery that comes in, he has to take that manual home. His wife reads it to him, maybe 2 or 3 hours a night, every night for several days, however long it takes him to get through it. But she'll read him the entire manual, and she has no clue what this stuff is. It's a bunch of numbers, and it's information that it's a technical manual.
When operating
And
a
when-
piece of equipment in this situation, you want to set your offset at this angle with a deviation angle of.
It sounds a lot like that, only not as interesting. But he will sit there and she'll read it one time, cover to cover, and then he can deal with that piece of equipment. He can program it, he can fix it, he can set it up, he can take it down, he can take it apart, he can, yeah. But without never even having read the manual. But just because he can hear it, he gets it. He also has extraordinary sense of direction. One time we went to Las Vegas and none of us had been there before. None of us knew anything about it. We didn't have a map, but he was able to guide us. We just followed him when we went from one point to another point, back and forth across the city, you know, from the strip, one end of the strip to the other end of the strip, over here, over there. We were able to follow him because his sense of direction was so perfect. He was never really lost. And I would be completely turned around. I had no clue which way was up or down or left or right or north or south or.
The dyslexic mind is like, it doesn't do this part well, but it's far more focused in other areas to an extreme degree, really. Able to do a lot really well. There was one company I worked at, their top sales rep, period, nationwide, was completely illiterate. Never met him, never talked to him, but from what they said, I think he was dyslexic, one of those extremes. And we're dealing with multi-page contracts, legal forms, all sorts of stuff. He'd take it home, his wife would read it to him, he'd memorize it, he'd be able to quote it word for word. And you could ask him, page 4, paragraph 2, what was this part again? And he'd be able to summarize that, explain it to you, read it to back to you word for word, explain what it meant, what each part, perfectly memorized. Okay, then you sign off on that part and go on. But yeah, he remembered all of that. Couldn't read any of it, but he could memorize and function all of that. It's just incredibly focused in other areas. It's not a matter of laziness or mental incompetence. It's just focused and ability. The funniest story I have on that is there was one company I worked at. We were in training. They had a lot of stuff to go over in a very short time. I was not picking up on the stuff right away, and the supervisor was frustrated that I wasn't getting all this stuff right away. And I explained, understand I'm dyslexic, so I learn a little slower on some of these things, but give me time to get it down, I'll be your best tech. And he said, okay. I am not kidding. The next day, he calls me up for the instructions and literally says, do you think you can do this? And I'm thinking to myself, tell me you're not this stupid. They were. I guess ignorance would be a better explanation. The day after, they decided just to fire me and let me go because it just wasn't going to work out. And I just shake my head and walked away because, I mean, I've done far more technical stuff, far more difficult things. And as I said, if you give me time, I'll be your best tech.
Okay, so I was working at Tasty Freeze, which I don't know if there are any of those still around or not, but gives you an idea how long ago it was. And I was cashing out at the end of my shift, and I was you count the money and then you write down, so many ones. And I had reversed a number, and my supervisor caught it, and she said, oh, you wrote down this number, you meant to do, it was a different number. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I'm sorry, I reversed the 2 numbers. I'm dyslexic, sometimes it happens. And she got real quiet, and she looked at me real strange, and she says, you're dyslexic? And I said, well, yeah, but it's not a big problem. I'm always really super careful. And she says, well, we have sharp objects here. Should you be around? I didn't know what to say. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't think I want to know what she was thinking.
Yeah, neither do I. Oh my goodness. It's like, oh, sharp objects. We can't have dyslexics around because they might confuse which end was dull. I'm holding this knife and I'm trying to cut the stuff. It's not working. Why is my hand bleeding? That's like, okay, I can't imagine what she thought it was, but that's really crazy.
Yeah, I wanted to say I'm dyslexic, not psychotic. It's
Yeah.
totally different.
Oh, maybe that's what she confused. Oh,
Maybe.
we can't have psychotics here. We have sharp objects. For safety of the customers, we do not allow psychotic people to work here.
They did let me go shortly after that.
Ay, ay, ay.
Well, one thing there is a misunderstanding out there, I think, because I think some people believe that it's curable. I do not believe you can cure it. I believe you can overcome it, but it's always there.
It's how the brain is wired.
Yeah.
I don't think you're gonna cure something like that. It's how it works.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, just like earlier, I was able to read. I can read. I read very well, actually. But if I'm tired or stressed, I can't read.
I remember there was one time you had a couple different deadlines and things going on. Your waist, I can't even remember exactly what it was. It had to do with that theater or some other stuff. But it's like you couldn't function. You couldn't do anything, but you knew you had to get this stuff done. And it's probably the best way I could describe it is you were near hysterics. And I'm trying to think what I can do to help.
Yeah. Yeah, if I get stressed, the letter I, the capital letter I, the word I as in myself, I cannot read the word I. It's one letter. Let alone I, that's three letters. I will turn that, I have often turned that into a number, and I'm trying to figure out why that number is there and what it means, because it should be a number there. My brain is just, and that's when I'm really stressed, and that's how I know that I still have it. It hasn't gone away. I've just managed to compensate for it, which my compensation actually is kind of hurting me now, because I'm at an age now where my sight is beginning to fail. I need glasses, but I cannot get an accurate eye test because I don't necessarily have to see clearly what is in front of me to be able to identify what it is, and I have a hard time turning that mechanism off so that I can get an accurate eye test. I have yet to be able to do that, and for me that's a real challenge right now, because I really do need to be able to see, and I can't get accurate eye tests to get good glasses.
And now you brought up an interesting point I never noticed with myself, but I'll be typing in 4 letters or 4 keystroke sequences. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I never noticed that, and I'd have to even stop to think. I don't even know how I'm processing to do that.
Yeah, now, and I do the same thing. I'm not sure what my pattern is, but I think it's probably about that. We both also did data entry, which is usually, whenever you're doing data entry, if anybody's ever done it, you type in a series and you hit enter. You type in a series, you hit enter. You type in a series, you hit enter, or tab. You know, you're hitting that
enter
a
lot of tabs.
Button, you know, and so you get used to typing in that pattern. And I knew when I was doing data entry that I would never be able to erase this pattern. And I don't know. So I don't know if that particular thing is due to the data entry that we did or the dyslexia. Because I did data entry for good almost 10 years.
Yeah, I did a lot less, but that's possible that it's just a pattern or something picked up from that. But I also know I'll see a number, process it or anything I have to type in there, whether it be some kind of code, like, 4 letters or something like that, with some kind of code that I have to put into a line, process it, analyze it, put it in, verify it, move on. And that might be what's going on. Again, to try to analyze, so tell me, how are you thinking? Well, I don't know, it's just, I think. Does the drumming of the fingers help? Probably.
That's me.
It's just, you'll have people ask, so wow, what's it like to be dyslexic? And I couldn't explain it.
I have an idea. And I think this might really give you an idea, if you're not dyslexic, what it's like to try to read when you have dyslexia. Is if you go to your cabinet or your cupboard or go to the store, pick up an item, the more highly processed, the better. The more scientific words in the ingredients, the better. But take something, turn it upside down, and try to read the ingredients. And that is pretty much what a dyslexic sees when we face a page of words or letters.
Yeah. Actually, kind of on that point, a lot of times you'll see these, I can't think what they're called.
Oh, by the way, if you can still read the ingredients list, you might be dyslexic.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you don't see them quite as around much as they used to, but there used to be these little joke things going around where it's things with a word without missing characters and things in it, or doing things like that. One was they'd remove all the vowels and people could still read it, and explaining how the mind works. I didn't even notice the vowels were missing. Read it, and I'm trying to figure out what the joke is or where.
I've done that with those same ones, yeah. Used to get them a lot on Facebook or back in the days of MySpace.
Yeah, I'd see those, or I'd see other things like that are supposed IQ tests. If you're still able to understand this, you're in the top 3% mental capacity or whatever. What? I don't get it. I just read the sentence. How's this? And I'm trying to figure out where the test is. It's got to be some kind of joke. It's got to be. And then after a few moments of analyzing, I realized, some of the letters are reversed or things like that. Russian, you'll have like the reverse R. I will actually run across stuff that's in Russian for different reasons and then not realize it. I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah. And we both have issues with certain fonts.
Yeah.
There are certain things we cannot read just because of the font that's used.
Yeah, I know. I can never remember all the different names of the fonts and stuff are. But there was one, it's supposedly really efficient, everything's really tightly packed together, you can fit a lot of information on the page. I couldn't read it. It's like it just one continuous jumble, whereas your classic New Times Roman or Courier, things like that, where it's a little more spread out, easily read it. Although I will say I've had problems with that. There was some fonts and letters space the letters out more than they should because they won't let the letters overlap. So for example, a capital K or an X where it has arms sticking out, and then you have another letter that have arms or something sticking out on the opposite side, it won't have them touching or overlapping, so it looks like there's a space between there, so you're thinking it's two different words and it's one word. And so that'll throw me too, because it's like, what's this supposed to be?
That will mess me up too, just because the letters aren't where they should be.
Looks like there's a space in the middle of this word. I'm trying to, and I have a hard time analyzing what is this word.
And there's a few, like, we've been out driving around and we'll see a sign on a building advertising their business or the name of their business, but the font is such that he and I, even if we pulled into the parking lot, parked and looked at it, would not be able to read what that was. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the name of that font is, but it's a very stylized, very fancy,
almost calligraphy.
Yeah, which I can read calligraphy. So it's not, but it's along that line. It's really fancy, and it just looks like a bunch of swirls and curls. And
yeah, I've had times where I'll ask SweetS, like, can you read that? What is that? And she can't either. It's like, well, we'll never know what it is. Mystery of life. Actually, on that, we'll both have times where we'll do this. Look around, and for whatever reason, our minds grabs first half of one word, second half of another word in our glance, and then our mind will register, and I was like, did that say Gerber? spelled like green bear kind of thing. What? And I'll look back and I'll realize the street sign was green and it had a sign or something that had bear in it.
Yep.
And it's like you wonder, how did I grab those?
Mm-hmm.
Green street, and you just you'll just glance around and it's like your mind's taking in stuff, but it's picking and choosing what parts it's actually going to register.
Yeah. We were going the other day and we were stopped at a light and there was a car driving by and there was a sign on the corner, and I can't remember exactly now how it worked out, but I know that Hunter was on the truck that was driving by the sign that said something else, and I don't know, maybe it said Bear Street. As I glanced at it and I looked away and then I realized, wait a minute, did that say bear hunting? Or no, I think it said something about crosswalk.
Oh, bear crossing.
Yeah, Hunter and crosswalk or something like that. So my brain picked up Hunter's crossing, and I kind of had to look again, and I couldn't find the sign now because of course it had moved. I didn't realize I'd picked up Hunter off the truck. As it drove across the street and was driving down the other way, I realized, oh, that said Hunter, sign said crossing. That's how I did it, but that's another indication of how this works. And you really don't have any control over what your brain picks up.
There was this one place I used to go pretty regularly, and they had this sign that I always had to laugh to myself when I would see it. And it was a large print sign stuck on the wall, intended for people to see, posted whatever information. But my mind would go down vertically and taking the first letter or first word off each line, and it made kind of quasi sense. I'd go down the second letter, the third letter, and they were staggered all back and forth. But my mind would pull these up and put them into a new sentence. It was always funny. It would be things such as, all visitors will be violated, or something like, it's like, will comply with all violations, or it was something like that, and I just think it would be funny. Although, if I were to explain the joke to anyone else, they'd look at me like I was nuts. Why would you pick that up out of that slide? They're thinking, what kind of convoluted brain would think of that? And I'd look at it, it would just, almost like 3D printing would come off. It'd pop up at me, and I that's how I would read it. I know I'm supposed to read it laterally, going across the lines. It said something, all visitors are required to, violations will result in, whatever. I can't even tell you now what the sign was, but I always wanted to get a copy of it just because to me it was funny because it would come off in these vertical rows. And it's just strange the way your mind would pick up on this stuff. And I couldn't even explain why. It doesn't do it all the time. I could look at 900 signs and not have my mind do that. Maybe because it made sense in that sequence in a comical way. Who knows? But I've encountered that before, but I've not seen it consistently. So the best I could say is my subconscious is taking the data incorrectly, and if it comes across something funny, it shares it with me. And that's probably where some of my humor comes in. I've had a couple people, place I work now, they were testing a piece of equipment, and it starts, and now this is an electronic piece of equipment, and it starts making all sorts of noise and rattling and all sorts of stuff, and they turned it off. I was like, gee, I wonder what the problem is here. And I just spoke up and said, I think it needs a new muffler. and most of them laughed over that one. One person said, you were so funny. And it's like, that's just what came to my mind. And it had a rattle kind of like a misfiring engine. It turned out there was a piece of debris in a whisper fan that was rattling around inside. And I suspicion combined with a bad hard drive, if any of you cared, was making this very strange and inconsistent rattle. But when I am working, I'll need things to be in a certain sequence. But it varies from what I'm doing. My work area might be a mess. But if it gets too much of a mess, I find I can't work there. My old office, where it just became a dump area, I couldn't do anything there or very little there, just because it just was such a mess. I couldn't get any space to work. And where I work now, repairing different things, pieces of equipment, I'll set, I realized, and I've developed this habit, this pattern, and I'll have to have it be like this, but on the far right, I had to stop and think which was the right. Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing I want to get into too.
On the far right, I have the package for the new part. I'll take it out, but I'll set the package there because I have to put the old part in that for return. I will have the paperwork for it, followed by the sealant and different other components in a set sequence. And then in front of me, I'll have the device I'm working on. To the left side, I will have the parts I'm taking off as I disassemble it. On the right side, I will have, it's very structured and ordered. And it's served me very well until one day there were a bunch of people from corporate that were helping, and they weren't. And I had so much distractions because they kept interfering and interrupting me when I was putting it together. The gasket sealing on the two different parts, and there's a plastic layer you peel off before you put them together. I peeled the one side off, not the other side, put it together. So when they were then testing it to make sure it met quality checks, it wasn't passing the water test sealing. So one tech pulls it apart to figure out what's going on with it, and he realized I had left this sealing in there. So he kind of jokingly but seriously told me, "Hey, you left this in here," and I was, "Oh, good, I'm sorry." I had a bunch of stuff going on at that time, and he understood. These people helping, messing it up for us. If somebody messes with my sequence, I can't just pick up with it.
I've had that issue too. I can do pretty much anything I set my mind to doing, but if I start to do something and somebody comes along and interferes with it and moves something, or pretty much if they move something, I can't function. I have to start completely over again from the beginning. And this goes for just about anything. Dishes. If I'm getting ready to do dishes and I stack them all up the way I want them, and then somebody comes along and takes one stack and moves it, to the other side of the cabinet, I'm like, no matter where I'm at in what I'm doing, I have to stop, move everything back over, set it all up again, and then start again. And I do that in my job. If I'm doing something and I'm rolling through it and if something happens to interrupt me, I can take care of the interruption, but then when I come back, I got to start right back from the beginning again and go through it again. I can't. And I know that's really weird, and that's one of the things I don't like about myself. I seem to be able to control that one.
Everyone has their quirks.
Going back to what it's like to live with dyslexia, I know others have no problem with direction. They have no problem with direction at all. Tox and I both have issues with right and left. We can do north and south and east and west, and sometimes we do reverse those even. But I know that, people were always telling me, it's so simple. Hold your hands up in front of you, and which one makes an L? That's your left hand. When you're dyslexic, they're both L's.
Yes, we were at a friend's playing a game, the game of Clue. And
everything is the person on your left.
Yeah, much of it had to do with things on your left, the person to your left. So our friend asked, "Am I to your left?" I forget even why. Was it she just trying to aggravate or clarify or whatever? She was like, "Are you sure I'm the one to your left?" And poor SweetS is here trying to figure out which one's to her left because I'm sitting on the other side. And eventually she realized, yes, you are the one to my left.
And how I knew was my wedding ring is on my left hand. I know that. And I found my wedding ring, and that meant that was my left hand. She was on the same side as my wedding ring. So she was on my left.
And I wasn't even able to help her because our friend was across from me and SweetS is to my left, and I'm trying to reason out from SweetS' position what is her left because I can't help. So once we finalize, yes, you are to SweetS' left. We're dyslexic. Don't mess with us.
Don't mess with our heads. We do not know right from left. And I used to wear my watch on my right hand, and it was really comical because I guess most people can't wear their watch on their right hand because if somebody says what time it is, if they're holding a drink and somebody says what time is it, they'll spill their drink looking at the time. Well, people would see me with my watch in my left hand all the time with a drink in my hand, and they say, "Well, what time is it?" And I would put my drink in my other hand and look at the time and tell them the time, put the drink back in my hand and drink the drink. And they never got me on that, but they used to tell me, don't wear your watch on your right hand. You'll spill your drink every time somebody asks you what time it is. It's never happened to me. I don't know if it's because I'm more intelligent than most people.
Probably just, well...
It was a government job.
Now, I'd imagine most of that actually has to do with the simple fact that we're ambidextrous, so most people wouldn't think to switch to their offhand. They have their offhand as a help if needed, but everything else is their predominant hand, whether it be right or left. When you're dyslexic, that boundary isn't there. I will flip my hand around and do stuff because whatever is easier. If I'm working on a small piece of equipment, I'll spin it around and do stuff, and in the process of repairing it, and then I will go to reassemble it, and I'll realize I need to turn it so my mind recognizes its orientation. You know, if whichever hand's easier to get to whatever it is, I flip it around, turn it, but when I go to reassemble, it's like my mind's like, what are we looking at? Turn it 90 degrees. Okay, now we can start putting the parts back together.
I remember we were playing a game once, and we were trying to work together to shoot down something. I don't remember now exactly what it was, but I know you told me, okay, to the west, to your west. And so I'm going to my west, and he says, no, to your west, not realizing that my west was his east. And he wanted me to go east, not west.
Oh, well, in games where the map turns with you.
Oh, forget that. I can't do those. When my compass turns, and I have the same thing with my phone, you know, the map on your phone. If it turns with me when I turn, I cannot use that because I know that north is always up. Well, sometimes if your map turns with you and you're going south, south is up, and it shouldn't be.
In most video games, the map in the corner, whichever corner it's in, turns with you, and it will show ahead as up. And for SweetS, if she the way her mind processes that, up always needs to be a constant direction. Yes. She can navigate from left, right, up, down from there. But when she turns and the map turns, there was one game we were playing, she was in a perpetual turn because her map...
I was chasing north.
Her map is turning, and she is turning with it, trying to get...
I think I was chasing south, actually. But yeah.
She's going to catch that compass point one of these days. And, oh...
we want to just touch on a little bit about how to overcome or compensate for dyslexia if you or perhaps your children have dyslexia. Things you can do that can help them to compensate for it, overcome it, and deal with it. All three of my children were diagnosed with dyslexia quite early. One of the things I did is when they had their spelling tests, I should say, not their spelling bees, They would bring home their spelling list, and we would go through and spell each word several times using sign language, the actual letters of sign language, A, B, C. And we would spell each word, 5 times, and then I would ask them with the sign language, and then I would ask them how to spell the word, and they would be able to tell me, and they would be able to write it. And that's how they got through they got through the spelling. And I remember my son's teacher was quite concerned because every time that he was taking a spelling test, he got real fidgety. And she called me about it, went in and had to have a teacher's conference. I was forever having teacher's conference. Had to have a teacher's conference. She told me that he got fidgety during his spelling test. And I says, really? I said, what is he doing? And she says, I don't know, but he sits there and he just does something with his hands. I said, could it be sign language? And she goes, I don't know. And I said, well, I have taught him to spell the word with sign language, and he may be trying to spell it. Okay, well, that's probably what's happening. But what was really concerning to her is he went from failing every single spelling test to passing every single spelling test. And she thought that this fidgeting with his hands had something to do with him cheating. And I said, well, you could call it cheating if you want to, but he's just learning how to spell a different way. That's one thing that I did with my kids to help them learn how to spell. And my youngest went from failing every single spelling test to winning the school spelling bee.
Actually, you should go into the undeveloped brain story.
Oh, yes, another teacher's conference. Or actually, this was a counselor's conference. It's school counselor. My oldest, one day the school counselor contacted me and said I needed to meet with her, and she had concerns about my daughter and wanted to put her into special classes. At that time, I wasn't entirely opposed to special classes because I went to special classes myself. But when I met with her, what she was trying to tell me and what she said was that my daughter had an undeveloped brain. I think she was probably in 4th grade by this time. And I said, really, an undeveloped brain? And she says, oh, yes. It's really quite common. And I'm like, no, I don't think it's really all that uncommon, all that common. And I said, she doesn't have an undeveloped brain. She has dyslexia. And then she went into trying to tell me that dyslexia is a broad spectrum and it can be anything from this to this. And I said, no, you do not understand what dyslexia is. And she says, excuse me, I am educated. And I said, well, education may be worth it or not. But I actually went home, did a week's worth of research, went back, met with her. We made the appointment for the following week, went home, did all this research, went back to her, and showed her what dyslexia really is. It's a disconnect between what they see or hear and what they perceive. I've always described it as a sort of a short circuit in that seeing, perceiving. And yeah, it does sometimes affect hearing. I've noticed sometimes when I'm really stressed, somebody's talking to me and all I hear is gibberish. Even though they're not saying gibberish, my brain interprets it as gibberish, and I have to ask them again to repeat themselves. That was one of the stories of people not understanding what it is. Anyway, this sign language alphabet is one of the ways I help my children to overcome dyslexia. In math, I helped my children by, it's not necessarily counting on your fingers, but keeping track of numbers on your fingers. I remember watching something on TV, and they were talking about the kids in Japan have learned how to use their hands as like an abacus. And I kind of taught that skill to them, and they were able to do better in their math classes. What about you? Do you have any suggestions on exercises people can do?
I couldn't say exercises or methods. What I did is I just learned to flip everything twice. Another thing I do is I do keep track of numbers when I'm doing calculations on my fingers. And it's not necessarily, okay, 3. Sometimes I'll put down a finger for 3. Sometimes if I'm carrying a 2, I'll put down 2 fingers for 2 or this and that. And it just depends on the situation, but I will often use fingers in different ways to do a calculation. But I could not put my finger on what I did to compensate outside of flipping everything twice.
What I'd like to say is it seems that a physical representation of what you are seeing or thinking is what is helpful. For instance, sign language when you're trying to spell, tapping your fingers when you're trying to add or subtract or multiply or divide or whatever you may be trying to do. A tap of the finger is a physical tie-in to what that number is, and once you have the physical tie-in, it's easier to grasp. It's a touch, it's a tangible thing that helps to keep the brain from flipping and moving and distorting, I guess.
The only thing else I could think to add is crossword puzzles and word finds. I could never find those, or very rarely. I'd have to look through, to find the word B-E-D, bed. I'd have to go through all the B's. Is there an E next to it? Is there a D on the other side? No? Okay, I could never find it. I knew a lot of people just like, oh, you just look it over and you can pop the word, circle the words.
See, yeah, and this just occurred to me as you were saying this. Why I love word search. I can do those all day long. I can do them upside down, sideways, same, I love those things. But the longer the word, the easier it is to find. But I have, short words like bed or bug. I will often have trouble finding those. But when I go to find the word, say I'm looking for
Monitor.
What I will do is I will look for Tor, T-O-R. When I find T-O-R, I found monitor. If I'm looking for something like giraffe, I look for double F's. If I'm looking for
Vision.
in vision, I would look for the VI.
And for me, it's just a jumble of letters.
And I don't try to look for the whole word. But if I'm looking for bed, I cannot find bed. I can't find bug, but I look for one or two letters. If I'm looking for xylophone, believe it or not, I do not look for the X's. I look for the phone. If I find phone, I found xylophone.
Such a dizzying mind we have.
It doesn't make any sense to anybody but me.
Yeah. That's okay. Dyslexics, don't sympathize for us. We have a superpower.
Yes.
Just don't ask us which side's left.
Oh yeah, don't do that. Don't ask us for directions. We will never be able to get you there. I give directions by compass directions. Most people that I give directions to don't know their compass directions. They know right and left. And I find that very, very odd because your compass directions are always constant unless your compass moves. But your directions are right. North is north, east is east, north is, right and left is completely dependent on what direction you're going. So I have no clue how, dyslexia aside, how do you give directions using right and left when it's completely dependent on what direction you're facing?
Most people, from what I've seen, take directions of leaving the driveway, and that's point everyone's facing the same direction, or backing out of the driveway, assuming, and then from that point start doing left, right, left, right, left, right. Right, left, right, left, going on these directions. Me, I always had a hard time following that because not just, which side's left, but is that a left or is that a left? Because, technically that was a cul-de-sac, but you could turn down it. So does that count as one of the lefts? And third left, okay. Are we counting cul-de-sacs? Or you go down a road and it curves. Does that count as a right? Or is that just the road? Yeah.
So someday I'd like to have somebody explain to me things like that. How do you give directions using right and left if you're standing on the east side of the street and the person that you're giving directions to is south of you? How do you do that?
The world wonders.
Or dyslexics do.